So basically the idea of this chat came through when I had a little chat with a lady a couple of weeks ago who told me, should you really exercise your pelvic floor in pregnancy? Because I have been told by my midwife that I should absolutely not do it. And that because this is the reverse of what we want to do in preparation for birth. So I thought that was a really, really interesting question. And it's a little bit of a controversial one. So there's definitely different opinions out there. And if you are pregnant and if you've been looking around or reading stuff around, you might have heard different things. So what I want to put out there first is that this is my take. I think this is what makes sense to me as a yoga practitioner and also as a mum. So I went through birth twice. But obviously, maybe there are other opinions around and, you have to find what works for you. So the first thing I want to say is that when we ask this sort of question and we talk about the pelvic floor, we tend to talk about it as if it was a complete separate part of our body. And the fact is that our pelvic floor is not separate and nothing in our body is separate. And our pelvic floor is actually part of our core. So it works together with your breathing and it works together with the bone structures that it's attached to, which is the pelvis. And it does a hell of a lot in our bodies, whether we are pregnant or not. So it responds to pressures in your abdomen when you move, when you bend, when you do lots of different things, plus all of these other functions like natural functions, like going to the toilet, etc. And so, of course, do we want to keep activating the pelvic floor in our pregnancies? Yes. And we want to be able to do that in a whole body sort of way, not just in an isolated sort of way. Because as our pregnancy progresses, of course, the weight of our baby and our uterus is pressing down on the pelvic floor, which might stretch it more. And so we want to make sure that these muscles continue to be as elastic and as responsive as they need to be to continue to support our body throughout pregnancy and beyond. And the way we want to do that is not necessarily by isolating the pelvic floor in exercise, but actually doing movements that are going to activate and maintain the suppleness of our pelvic floor in a whole body approach. So there was going to be lots of movements with our hips, things like squats, things like stretches. So lots of the things we actually do in pregnancy yoga are going to support that activation of the pelvic floor in that whole body approach. So that's the first thing I want to say. Yes, we want to keep our pelvic floor active in that way. Now, the second point, of course, that this question relates to is, do we want to do pelvic floor work, as in sort of Kegels, in our pregnancy? And this is where things get a little bit controversial. And my take is this. I say yes, but it depends to do what. So if you think about Kegels, lots of these Kegels, which are basically squeezing the pelvic floor for I don't know how many repetitions, as often as you can remember. Brush your teeth, do your Kegels, take your bath, do your Kegels. Anytime you remember, do your Kegels. I don't think that's the supportive approach to use in pregnancy. To be fair, I don't think that's the supportive approach to use anytime, but that's another conversation. My take is that we want to do pelvic floor work in pregnancy to gain awareness of these muscles. And this is very, very important. Now, this is what we do in yoga anyway, is to gain a better awareness of our body rather than to strengthen our body. That's definitely my approach. And for most women, before they have become pregnant, lots of women will not have engaged with those muscles consciously ever. So we have very little awareness of this part of our anatomy. This is not really taught anywhere. And so sometimes, or most of the time, especially for first-time mums-to-be, the pregnancy will be the first time that we start to pay attention to those muscles. We discover those muscles. And for lots of women, it's actually hard to find these muscles, to understand what they do and how to activate them. And also what do we understand by this activation? Because those muscles, yes, they can squeeze. I much prefer the term they can lift, but also they release. And this is something that we really need to become aware of, and we need to become able to control consciously. So in preparation for birth, we want to be able to know how to release our pelvic floor. So our babies, as they journey through the pelvis and out during the birth process, we need to make the most space for them to go through. And to limit the damage on those tissues of the pelvic floor, we need to make sure that those muscles can be as released, as soft as possible. And this takes learning. The first thing it takes learning for is actually a lot of us are a little bit over tight in the pelvic floor. So especially if you do a lot of exercising, or if you are a fitness or yoga teacher, we tend to squeeze the pelvic floor more. So we tend to be over tight. And learning to fully release the pelvic floor takes a little bit of time. And so that's one of the focus of pelvic floor work in pregnancy, in my mind, that we need to learn to do in conjunction with the breath, so that as we breathe our babies out, we can release the pelvic floor. The second thing we want to learn is also that we want to know how to engage the pelvic floor, so to lift it up, so to regain tone, not necessarily for pregnancy, but especially for postnatal recovery. So once you have given birth, and especially if you have given birth vaginally, your awareness of this part of your anatomy is going to be numb to start with. But it is very beneficial to try to heal and rehab the pelvic floor as soon as after birth as we can. So once the muscles are not bruised anymore, we want to engage those again. And that can be really, really difficult if you have never learned to do that consciously before. So if you practice in pregnancy, just enough to have that awareness, not to build overtone, but just to know how to do it, it will be much easier postnatally to be able to do those exercises, even if things feel a little bit numb down there. So the mind will assist, and your body will know what to do as you engage and release those muscles. And so that's another really important thing. The last thing I want to say about that is also that our pelvic floor is actually composed of various muscles. And I think it's very supportive and empowering to understand how these different muscles work. Because one, they're part of your anatomy, and we deserve as women to know our anatomy. And two, because we will be able to better understand where to push our babies when the time comes to be born. And it's mostly in response, in my own experience, in my first birth, when I was told to push my baby as if I was told to push a poo. And what that does, this very simple cue does, is that most of us will then push in the direction of our back passage, as if we were going to the toilet, when actually we're trying to push our baby out through our vaginas. And the angle and the direction, even if it's a subtle change, is not the same. And so by understanding really the direction where we are pushing, we will create less stretch, less damage on our tissues. And so to gain this awareness, it's really important to do pelvic floor awareness work. This is what I call it in pregnancy. Now, that's most of the things that I wanted to say. I know quite a few people are online, so in case you have any questions, let me know. Oh yeah, one last thing I wanted to say, that of course then in pregnancy, some of us, so I said lots of first-time mums or mums-to-be, will tend to be rather tight rather than too stretched. But in second-time mums, or some of us might also feel actually we're experiencing pelvic floor dysfunction during pregnancy. So maybe a weak bladder or other sort of pelvic floor dysfunction. And so then depending on your situation, you can also use the pelvic floor work to support or to rehab those dysfunction. So moms or mums-to-be who are experiencing more like weakness in the pelvic floor, can of course use pregnancy to try to also re-strengthen the pelvic floor enough so that the pelvic floor functions properly. Whereas other mums who don't have this function might focus on releasing the pelvic floor more. So there's also an individual approach to it. And that's why, like everything, blanket statements never address everything. So this is what I wanted to say. So if you have any questions, please just type it in there. I'm going to try to publish this video, so if you're watching on replay, you can also ask. And then last March, I ran a pelvic floor workshop online, and it was really popular, and we explored different exercises on how to support the pelvic floor in a whole body movement, and then also how to gain this awareness of the pelvic floor and the different parts of the pelvic floor, how to learn to engage it but also to release it, how to have this very mindful approach to the pelvic floor, and how to prepare a pelvic floor for birth, and then of course how to support it in rehab postnatally, whatever type of birth you had. So because it was really popular, I'm gonna run it again in July. So it will be on the 3rd of July on a Saturday morning. So the link is on the website. You can get through it through the link in my bio. There's an early bird price at the moment for £15, and it will be an hour and a half of lots of practical interactive exercises and question and answers. So if you feel that you need a little bit more support in understanding this part of your anatomy at this key time of your woman's life, that might be the workshop for you. So that's it for me, and so hope that was helpful and clarified some of these questions. And yeah, and as I said, any questions later on, please do drop me a DM, a comment. Really happy to answer any questions you might have. So thank you so much.